Senator Orrin Hatch says President Obama and the Democrats have an arrogance of power and are trying to do something unconstitutional. Senator Hatch went on the record. Senator, nice to see you, sir.
Well, nice to see you.
Senator, there's, of course, the big issue whether the health care bill will get passed ever and signed by the president. But jumping ahead, assuming that for some reason that it does get passed, even though I know that you're fighting against passing this particular bill, does it have constitutional issues down the road that we ought to be focusing on?
Well, it does have serious constitutional issues. Number one, this will be the first time in history that individual citizens in this country would be forced to buy something they may not want. And they may be forced to buy a federal version of something they don't want. You know, the Commerce Clause has always been used to involve matters involving activities that substantially affect interstate commerce. Well, you can't justify telling people that they have to buy something they don't want.
Is there any statute that you know of or legislation where the Congress has told people they must buy something, or anything remotely similar that we can sort of try to, you know, gauge this particular legislation against that? They
cite everybody has to buy automobile insurance. Well, that's not true. You don't have to drive a car. You can choose not to drive a car. If you drive a car, yes, the state requires you to buy automobile insurance, but that's the state, that's not the federal government. The federal government, you know, liberty depends upon limitations on the federal government. And that's why the Commerce Clause has never been used to go so far as to tell people they have to buy something they don't want.
Well, and I thought that with, at least with automobile, the justification for the insurance is that driving is a privilege, it's not a right, which is why that states are able to do that.
Well, you said it better than I did. Yeah, driving is a privilege. It is a state-run situation. If the state wants you to requires you to buy automobile insurance, you're going to have to do it, but even then you don't have to drive. You could say, I'm not going to buy it, and you have that right as a citizen. That's one of your liberties that you can assert. If the Congress of the United States mandates that you have to buy an insurance policy, a health insurance policy, that would be the first time in history that the Congress has gone that far. If they can force you to buy a health policy that they design, or a health policy period, then they can force you to do anything. There would be no limitation on Congress as to what they can force the citizens to do. And the Constitution just doesn't give that type of leeway.
Now, you wrote an op-ed piece that appeared at least in the LA Times where I saw it, and you also talked about the tax issue, whether or not there could be a disparity in the excess tax and whether that would be a possible challenge should this bill get passed.
Well, excise taxes have to be applied uniformly.
By the Constitution?
By the Constitution and by the interpretations ever since by the Supreme Court. In this particular case, they provide an ability in the bureaucrats to determine about 17 states that might not be as required to pay that Cadillac insurance, and that would be a violation of the Constitution, which requires all excise taxes to be uniform.
All right, now I knew coming here, you know, what your positions were on those constitutional issues.
Well, there's one other too.
Okay, well, go ahead.
There are some others, but let me just mention one other, and that is that the Cornhusker deal. In other words, they made a deal with the senator from Nebraska that Nebraska would never have to pay its share of the Medicaid costs, while every other state does, which means that all 49 other states will have to pay Nebraska's share. Well, that isn't right either, because that again has to be uniform, and it's just a violative of the Constitution. It's filled with anti-constitutional principles, and frankly, I hope that the House does not take the Senate bill. They could, and we'd be saddled with that doggone thing. I don't think they will. I think there are some better thinkers over there about doing that. But if they did, we'd be stuck with some really unconstitutional approaches towards health care.
But the reason I was sort of curious, and I'd read your op-ed piece, is because in the event that you are right on these constitutional issues, it would be enormously difficult, or we'd have quite a problem in our country should the legislation be passed and then declared unconstitutional. So it seems to me that those issues, to the extent they can be resolved before we get a bill implemented, would be quite wise.
Well, it would be, and frankly, there are legal experts who differ with me on these items, but people are more and more coming to the conclusion that I'm right on them, and that we should not go that far as to impose mandatorily on people health care principles that, or health care costs that they don't want to pay.
And of course, we can't get an advisory opinion of the United States Supreme Court. They don't do that kind of thing. So we're sort of treading on, we're in new territory on this particular issue.
You sum that up well. The Supreme Court does not give advisory opinions, and that's been established law for a long time.
All right, so where are we on the health care bill? Today is, if you're a betting man, probably you're not a betting man, but where is it, this bill? Is it going to get passed or not?
Well, I don't think it is, and frankly, the Democrats are saying, well, let's go back and strip it down and start working on it. You can't work on something that has a bad foundation. You can't build a house on a bad foundation. You should just tear down what you have and start over. And if they would start over on a step-by-step basis, I think there are a number of issues that we could have agreement on, where we would work together on those issues. Right now, Republicans are very upset with what they've tried to foist off on the American people, and there isn't a lot of desire to work with them on, especially on what they've done so far. But if we started over, went on a step-by-step basis, really worked on things that we could agree on, I think we could come up with a health care bill that would work pretty well.
So if the Republican senators are upset, sort of give me the behind-the-scenes color. You walk down the hall and you see, for instance, Majority Leader Harry Reid. What do you say to him? Do you say, nice day, or lousy bill, or when we get to, what do you say to him?
Well, I'm very friendly to Harry, and I'm very friendly to everybody else. You can get really irritated with what they do, but that doesn't necessarily mean you attack them personally.
But don't you want to collar them, into a corner and say, look, let's talk about this?
Well,
how does it work?
I've told a number of them how stupid their approach is.
You tell them to use the word stupid?
Oh, yeah. Oh, of course. I tell them how ridiculous and stupid some of their approaches are.
And their response?
Well, they laugh and then say, well, tell us how to do it better. Well, I'd love to do that. There are a lot of health care bills that I've worked on that are now law that work. And I've worked on them in a bipartisan way with Kennedy, with Harkin, with Dodd, with Henry Waxman. Take the Hatch-Waxman Act that created the modern generic drug industry. That was with Henry Waxman, one of the most liberal people in the whole Congress, who I happen to like. And I like all of the others, too. And I can say I'd be happy to work with them, but my gosh, the Help Committee bill did it completely without any Republican input. The Pelosi bill without any Republican input. The Reid bill without any Republican input, including without any real Democrat input. And then they come to you and say, take it or leave it. Well, that isn't the way you do legislation around here, and it was an arrogance of power. They knew they had 60 votes, or at least felt they could get together 60 votes, which they did, and that they didn't need Republicans. Well, on something that involves 1/6 of the American economy, that's this costly, this important, affects every living American. If you pass something on a strictly partisan basis, it's a lousy bill. The CHIP bill, we had to fight really hard. It took us 2 years to take care of the child health insurance program. That was the Hatch-Kennedy bill. When we got through, we had, I think, close to 80 votes. It was a bipartisan vote. Everybody said, this is a really good bill. And it turned out to be a really good bill as originally written. Now they've distorted that bill. Because what they want to do is they want to get to a single-payer system. And that is socialized medicine, really, by having the federal government dominate everything in health care. If we do that, we got to be the stupidest people on earth. I'll use that word again. Because in all honesty, we know the federal government and the bureaucrats here in Washington are not going to handle it as well as the states.